You can brace yourself for some major aftershocks, at least a 5.5 at some point. That usually does happen, and Dr. Kate Hutton is going to be talking to us in just a few moments here, giving us the latest information on this. But in terms of aftershocks, as we all know, you can expect some major ones, at least a 5.5 at some time in the very near future, diminishing with time. That's, of course, under the assumption that this wasn't a foreshock, kind of a frightening idea that another large one is headed our way. But again, as time progresses and we're okay, there is no major shaking, then the chances of that diminish dramatically. Again, 6.6 on the Richter scale, and let's glance over and see what Dr. Hutton is now writing down, probably a shallow thrust fault. Now keep in mind, this is the San Fernando fault where the earthquake took place in 1971. Is that right? No, I was wrong. Probably a shallow thrust fault under the San Fernando Valley. Okay, Dr. Hutton, are you ready to give us a statement here, do you think?
At 5:45.
5:45. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes. Again, they're getting information very slowly here, but they're paying very close attention to where the aftershocks are coming from, slowly narrowing it down. They hope to ascertain very shortly not only the epicenter, but how deep the quake is.
The one in India last year, I believe, was a 6.2 or 6.3. But, of course, that's where, in third world countries where you have mud huts and very poor construction collapsing on people, those can come down in a hurry. Fortunately, in this country, and especially in California, we have had some very strong seismic codes instituted in the last 30, even the last 50 years since the 1933 Long Beach earthquake. And so that does a lot to mitigating our damage in this country.
We have so far no reports of any injuries and no verified reports of any major structural damage. Does that surprise you, or are we just late getting the word?
No, it doesn't surprise me because of, as what I said, California has very strong seismic building codes, and since most of the construction in the Los Angeles Basin is of the last 30 to 50 years where they have built for earthquakes, that type of civil engineering and structural engineering codes are paying off. And as we are in the business are fond of saying, earthquakes don't kill people, buildings kill people.
Thank you for talking with us. We've just talked with Pat Jorgensen of the U.S. Geological Survey in Menlo Park, California. Jan Fonder has contacted us by phone.
If you wouldn't mind, we're going to pan over. Okay, you're going to, great. This is a bedlam right here, as you can imagine. There's a board that Caltech put in a long time ago to help the television media get a picture from this particular room downstairs. For some reason, that's not working, so we've had to go back to the old-fashioned way of cabling up from the street all the way to the second floor of the seismology building here. But in any case, Dr. Hutton's going to be giving us the latest information. I have to tell you, though, everybody adds their own personal insights into these kind of things. As a native of Southern California, I've been to my share of earthquakes. I was in the Loma Prieta earthquake at Candlestick Park in San Francisco in 1989, and I can tell you this is probably the strongest earthquake I have ever felt. It was quite remarkable.
Well, and Conan, indeed, that earthquake then in 1989 was 7.1 on the Richter scale. That was an earthquake that claimed 63 lives in the Bay Area, $7 billion in damage, and for you to say that this one was the strongest you have felt since then says something, because that was indeed a strong earthquake. The last really strong earthquake felt in Southern California was the 6.4 Sylmar earthquake in 1971. Right now, we're trying to find out if we can get Kate Hutton at Caltech, who's going to give us the live update on this morning's earthquake.
Okay, I'd like to give you a summary of the activity this morning. The preliminary magnitude 6.6 for a quake at 4:31 this morning in San Fernando Valley. It was widely felt all over Southern California, as far away as Las Vegas. We believe it was on a shallow thrust fault under the San Fernando Valley. At this point, we don't know whether it's one of the main named faults or whether it's something new. There were, well, a lot of aftershocks as far as the recording is concerned, and we haven't been able to look in detail at their magnitudes or distribution. But I know that there were at least one probably in the 5 range, and several more that I personally felt, so those would be in the 4 range at least. We expect aftershocks to go on at least for a week or so, maybe a month or so for this sized earthquake at an ever-decreasing rate. So people will be feeling a little bit of shaking here and there. It's best for people to beware of damaged structures because aftershocks will be continuing and they could cause further damage.
Dr. Hutton, how big could the next aftershock be?
Well, the textbook earthquake has an aftershock that's a little bit larger than 1 point less, or a little bit less than 1 point less than the main shock, so in the 5s. And that,
5.5.
yeah, and that could cause damage to damaged buildings.
This
So
thing seemed to
that's-
last a long time, the original quake. Is there any way to say, can you specify how long the earthquake
Well,
lasted?
it actually probably took the fault only 10 or 15 seconds to break, but because of reverberations of waves within the crust and also buildings vibrating and also aftershocks, you probably felt it for longer than that. And depending on where you are, what type of soil you're on, what type of building you're in, what floor you're in, so forth, it could be anywhere from 10 seconds to 20 or 30 seconds. Yeah.
Is it your belief that this is a different fault then than what ruptured in 71 in the Somar quake?
At this point, it looks to be south of the activity in the 1971 earthquake. So at this point, we think it's probably not on the San Fernando fault. But it does appear to be a shallow thrust fault. So it could be a buried thrust under San Fernando Valley.
What is a shallow thrust fault? What does that mean?
Well, that's the geometry of the fault. Now, a lot of faults in California go straight down into the crust. But this one goes at, the San Fernando fault went down at an angle of about 45 degrees, and this one appears to be more shallow than that. So the fault actually has an angle to it, and San Fernando Valley would be up here, and the fault is like this. So most of San Fernando Valley is going to be exposed to activity very close to the fault. Okay, and a thrust fault means that this side is sliding up over the part below it.
Dr. Hutton, does it
Okay.
follow that because the initial earthquake was centered over the northern San Fernando Valley, that the aftershock would be centered there as well, or could it be centered somewhere else?
Okay, well, the epicenter of the main shock is only the place where the rupture started, and then the rupture spreads out, sort of like unzipping a zipper. You start on one end, and it moves all along. So the aftershocks will be distributed all around the area where the fault ruptured. So some of the aftershocks will be close to the epicenter of the main shock, and some will be near the other end or the extent of the rupture during the main shock. So that's why the aftershock distribution is so important to us. To determine exactly what the fault plane was that broke.
Can you say at this point what communities the fault runs through? Do you know exactly the path of the fault?
No, at this point we don't know exactly what fault it's on, so it's hard to say that. But if it's a shallow thrust fault under San Fernando Valley, then all of San Fernando Valley will be affected because they will all be within a fairly close range. If I can do this thing with my hands again, here's the surface with San Fernando Valley right here. If the thrust fault is under here, then all of this whole area is going to be rather close to the fault.
Now, there was on the cube system an indication of a 2.1 at 9:29 last night and a 2.1 at 2:36 this morning in about the same place. Would those be considered foreshocks?
If they check out to be at the epicenter of the main shock, then they would be foreshocks. And frankly, I haven't had time to look at that yet.
Would there be any reason to believe that this is related to the Santa Monica quake last weekend that we had offshore?
That's another thing that we would have to look at before we could say one way or the other. I wouldn't want to rule out the possibility that there's some kind of physical relationship because they were close in location. But on the other hand, statistically speaking, we have quake